We map our car roads down to the centimeter. We track vehicle counts in actual real time. We tend to optimize for throughput, for speed, for automation. But what happens if you're not in a car? What if you are someone who's trying to get to the grocery store while using a wheelchair or navigating with a white cane? You open your favorite map app, and the infrastructure that shapes your journey is not visible. Or worse, it could be sometimes actively hostile. Hi, I'm Anat Caspi, the director of the Taskar Center for Accessible Technology. And that lack of discoverability and lack of data is the reason that the Taskar Center for Accessible Technology started the Transportation Data Exchange Initiative, or TDEI. This is a project that's sponsored by the United States Department of Transportation's ITS for Us program. While yes, it is a data infrastructure project, it is far from just a technical project. It is an ongoing conversation, a design conversation, and a participation with our communities. Because behind every sidewalk, behind every curb ramp, behind every textured warning script, there's a design decision that was made on behalf of the people taking journeys through these environments. But up until now, there were very few ways to ensure that journeys and real travel experiences are actually recognized and responded to through that design process. At the TDEI, we use digital tools and data discourse to capture those unmet non-motorized travelers' needs. And then we connect those stories to the data that's shared in the TDEI within its infrastructure. And this is how we inform better investments that elevate pedestrianism, elevate access and safety. Through the availability of these data, we make traveler applications as well as applications for planners widely available. So US Department of Transportation recognized this. There they talk about safety, about innovation a lot, but to make sure that these are not just buzzwords, but actual responsibilities, we want to create the data that allows them to understand what it is that they're funding and be able to actually see it. That's why they support the TDEI with partnerships like ours. And we've engaged transit agencies, departments of transportation from states like Washington, Oregon, and Maryland, as well as the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Together, we're building an open, interoperable data schemas, data sharing infrastructure, the ability to put together different data sources in order for pedestrian and accessibility infrastructure across different cities to be elevated. We bring in rural communities, we bring in tribal nations, urban and suburban environments. It is not just about sidewalks. It's really about travel equity, visibility, and putting all people and pedestrian travel environments first. So let's make this a lot more concrete. In Washington, we used AI and human vetting in order to build OS Connect. This is the most detailed sidewalk dataset, connected and routable, in the country. And it's really the first use of scaled AI to create such data at a whole state level. If you're a planner, a caregiver, a parent pushing a stroller, now you can see where it is safe to go block by block. That's a lot more than a map. It's a platform for visibility because people can interact with that map and let us know where data has changed, where information on the ground no longer reflects what's in the map. For example, in Klickitat County, rural planners use this data to finally make the case for funding in different interstate highway environments. In Yakima, our community testers marked unsafe intersections that hadn't been addressed in years. Every sidewalk segment, every ramp, every crosswalk is logged with care and intention, and today at SDF you can do the same. So now I'd like to introduce you to Kunal Mehta, one of our UX UI designers. Kunal, what role do communities play in this work, and how can more people get involved?
Thanks, Anand. Let me start by saying that this isn't a case where we are trying to randomly drop technology. We're designing with and not just for the communities that are historically ignored. Through pop ups, local team challenges, youth challenges, high school kids, we are inviting people to share their transit and mobility stories. We then use these stories as inspiration to build and to make design decisions that help us build the tools. Every tool we have right now is an example of this process. When we learned people needed trip planners that are more personalizable, especially when they are trying to walk or roll, Access Map was born. When we heard communities don't just want to consume data but actively be a part of it and contribute to the movement, a Weave Scout route was introduced. Similarly, when we realized there's a need to democratize how sidewalk impact assessment is done, and put this in the hands of everyday or average users, the Walkshed tool was introduced. This is what you'll exactly experience during if you visit the barrier to belonging wall. Now, I want to turn to you, Anand, and ask if you have a message for folks that they could take away, or even share something for upcoming and even established designers.
Thanks, Kunal. Yeah, so I think you touched on it, but I think we can accentuate the idea and impact behind our mutual community design challenge. If you're a planner, an architect, an engineer, or simply someone who is going to impact shaping space, we want everyone to stop designing for the average user. The idea is that no one is average. That does not exist. Instead, let's design for the edges, and that way everybody wins and everyone benefits. And now that the data is here and the tools are open and the need is really urgent, that is the time to deploy our co design capabilities and say, what does the data tell us about the lived experience in these communities? And how can we now shape our communities to really address the challenges that we are facing along sustainability, along safety, along access and reach? The ability for people to mobilize to their destinations, service, and community access. So there are three ways that anybody can act. You can join mapping through youth challenges. That means helping us prototype inclusive cities from the ground up. You can use Access Map or OS Connect to look up your own neighborhood, identify where are the gaps, give authorities comments and feedback about the infrastructure that does or does not support you. Likewise, with transit access, frequent transit, share your story. Visit our installation, contribute your experiences, but also contact us any old time in order to share that lived experience because behind every data point, there is a lived story. Behind every intervention, there was a moment of belonging or the barrier that led to it. So, Kunal, tell us what we marked this year.
This year, we marked the beginning, the official launch of the TDEI in 3 states. Washington, Oregon, and Maryland.
And we hope that this is not just ceremonial, it's actually a commitment through the USDOT to design with dignity, to invest with data, and to build with our community.
We can't wait to see what your community will design next. Let's build an infrastructure that sees everyone.
Okay, so Kunal Mehta, UX UI designer, you want to tell us a little bit about your process for designing the non-visual interface for Access Map?
Sure. When I joined the Taskar Center and learned about Access Map, there were two things. One was, I was of course blown away with the idea, but the other side to it was also that I didn't really have, you know app or a system that was like totally accessible to me, as a user who was blind, and having that lived experience, for that matter. And the other side to this was also that I have serious interest in navigation technologies, in transportation, and this kind of gave me a great avenue, sort of, to not necessarily contribute, because that would happen, but also get in the community's voice. And when we started designing the non-visual experience, the first thing we did was we obviously spoke to a lot of people, ran a lot of studies, prototyped, to see what works, what doesn't work, doing A/B testing, for instance, for different features. And let me say this: we are not perfect. We are not yet not where we actually want to be, but we are in a great shape, and we would really want to invite you to check out the non-visual experience, both at our installation and by yourself. You can turn on voiceover or talk back on your phone, or even use a screen reader on your computer, and see how it works. The idea, what or the main principle behind designing this experience was that it should be accessible to everyone, and not just to people who are blind or low vision. So we've tried to make it as seamless as possible. You don't need to download an app. You don't need to do anything special to access the non-visual experience. Just turn on your screen reader, and you should be good to go.
Was there anything surprising to you about the community's experience that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah. I, having attended good number of conferences, having met a lot of people, I realized so many folks are building, and they are all building amazing things, but it was hard to find a solution or a situation um, where every need or most needs are taken care of. So that to me was surprising, to see so much attention, or so much focus being given to this area of building accessible navigation, but not but none of the solutions really encompassing every need that folks might have. If I might give an example, an app that would help you understand your surroundings might not be great with navigation. Something that might be good with navigation might not necessarily give you information that you really need. Or some might it might be hard to do sort of first mile and last mile navigation with certain other solutions. So yeah, that was surprising, and that's what we're hoping to solve with Access Map non-visual experience.
Yeah. I did want to add that the app does serve the needs of other populations. As I myself experienced disability in my family with my daughter, we did design a lot of the personal preferences having to do with preferences about maximum incline, minimum decline. You know, where do you feel safe or not? Are you trying to avoid really highly populated, high transport, crowded streets? Um, what is the ability to navigate around certain barriers like stairs and lack of curb ramps? So that too is something that's represented in the app. And what I found is that because we kind of covered a lot of ground with this application and the kinds of preferences and the detail that people really wanted, we reached out, it turned out, to populations that we never even imagined. Like, we weren't designing necessarily for parents or caregivers pushing strollers, but of course, we found that that was one population that was served. But we didn't really anticipate having folks who are training their kids with tricycles. And so that became one of the use cases that we identified people using the app for. Another fun part of this was traveling in groups, so being able to accommodate like the width of the sidewalk for having multiple people on the sidewalk. And another use that I found myself is like when the streets are either wet or snowy, I tend to try to avoid routes that are very steep, and I can identify those routes even for a car with Access Map, using it in the pedestrian mode and trying to avoid certain types of inclines. Also, to identify where parking might be available that is not on an incline, since I was driving a van that had a ramp and it was pretty big and heavy, I preferred to find more flat spots to deploy the ramp, and that was enabled through the app. So I'm excited about the possibilities that this brings. Now we have 312 jurisdictions mapped, which is a lot more than just Seattle. So please come check us out. We're excited to meet you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I am. Uh, I always uh, use Access Map for different purposes. When I'm on computer and trying to look at a route, I preview, just look at the route high level through the screen reader hierarchy. When I'm actually traversing, I use the turn by turn direction. So yeah, even a single person can use it for so many different purposes. I want to ask you, Anat, about the Aviv Scout route and the idea behind that, and how that came along. And I know it's there at the installation for people to try out, but yeah, I just want to ask you about your idea about around that.
Thank you. That's a great question. So, the idea that data about public infrastructure should be public and democratized has been a running theme for us at the Taskar Center. While we are producing data at high scale for government and civic technologies, we want to make sure that the ecosystem of tools that we're providing are not just focused on planners, because then we will meet the same challenges that we've always faced, that the data is siloed, it's hard to share, and it's hard to people give feedback about what they're finding in the infrastructure itself. So a Vive Scout route is really all about challenging our communities to provide that kind of digital conversation, a discourse about what you're finding that meets your needs, what's not meeting your needs. Some of the data we're asking for is qualitative, about like subjective assessments about how you travel through these spaces, and other is quantitative because there are some missing pieces of data and the city or jurisdiction wants to know about it. And so we found that this is a really good way to provision people with the tool to provide feedback that is not necessarily dependent on making that one time uh, community feedback meeting that happens to be at 4:30 p.m. when you're picking up your kids from school, or you're running to find a bus to your job, whatever it is. It's a way for people to provide that feedback at off hours at their convenience, but still ensure that their voice is counting. So do check out Aviv Scout Route at our installation. And we will have also the ability for high schoolers to start their own clubs in order to promote more civic engagement through data gathering.
Maybe I had one last question for you. If all the years of work that has happened at Taskar Center, and this being a computer science lab, and I don't want to right now go into the computer science part of it, but if there's something you want to share, or something that you learned, just by working with the communities of practice, if there's anything around that, what might that be?
I think two things. One is that in engaging problems that involve many different kinds of stakeholders, it's actually more of a socio-technical problem than people imagine. And so much depends on the ways by which people are able to partner and collaborate and talk to each other, much more so than the actual technology itself. However, that said, the technology needs to support those conversations in ways that allow them to sustain. Because it's one thing for us to have an annual conference that everyone comes to, or it's one thing for us to have a way of broadcasting news for all the stakeholders that are involved in the community of practice. But it's another to enable the sustaining ways by which those conversations actually move things in a positive direction. It's been, in the first few years when we were not as well funded or supported by either the US Department of Transportation or the Washington State Legislature, the difficulty in machinating moving people together was not necessarily just the ability to meet up, but the ability to continue the institutional knowledge that we have been gathering in order to support these conversations with real information, real data, real tools, real, decision process supportive tools that enable the downstream consumption of what we just did or met about. And so having that kind of support, both from the socio-technical end and conversationally, has been really the thing to sustain this movement. And that's what's exciting me about this work still 10 years later. And I think with that, we will thank our audience and take it back to Mainstage. Thank you, SDF.
Thank you so much.